couple of weeks after the Australian Grand Prix, President Clinton signed into law two significant pieces of legislation. On November the 30th, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which requires background checks on anyone wishing to purchase a handgun. The Brady in question was James Brady, who'd been press secretary to Ronald Reagan and was shot in the head in 1981 during the failed assassination attempt on the president. Arguments about how exactly to enact gun control had been kicked around for many years before this particular bill was introduced in February 1993 by New York Representative Chuck Schumer. And then in early December, the North America Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which had been agreed in principle by President Bush in 1992, but had spent some time mired in arguments as it made its way slowly through Congress. Finally passed, it came into effect on the 1st of January 1994, eliminating tariffs on most trade between the US and Mexico. Most US-Canada trade was already tariff-free, with the aim of eliminating all trade tariffs by 2004. The first meeting of the Transitional Executive Council took place in South Africa, the first meeting of an official governmental body in the country with both black and white members, meeting to work out how to manage the transition to full democracy with the universal franchise. One of the most influential video games of the 1990s, Doom, was released in December too, in which the player took on the role of a space marine, not that sort, fighting his way through 3D levels full of demons with a series of improbable guns. There was originally going to be a complicated sci-fi plot, but this was mostly ditched in favour of a frantic action game. It was a huge hit, and although not the first in the first-person shooter genre, it was the game that really cemented it in the public imagination, and indeed for most of the rest of the decade, similar games such as Star Wars Dark Forces, Heretic and Duke Nukem were often referred to as Doom clones, though not all of them strictly aped the format. It was also hugely popular on the PC platform, and is credited with bringing PC gaming into the mainstream in the US, where consoles had been the default for video games since the 1980s. As 1994 dawned, there were more signs of hope, with Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin signing the Kremlin Accords, which agreed that US and Russian nuclear weapons would no longer be pre-targeted at each other. It made little practical difference, it would only take a couple of minutes to input targets anyway, and neither side had any way of verifying it had been done, but it was symbolic that the two powers no longer viewed each other as the default enemy. At the same time, a trilateral statement was signed between Clinton, Yeltsin, and Ukrainian President Leonid Kravchuk, agreeing that Ukraine would decommission or return to Russia all the former Soviet nuclear weapons on its soil in exchange for nuclear fuel from Russia and, quote, assurances, unquote, of Ukrainian security from the US, but not, quote, guarantees, unquote, which would commit America to the military defence of Ukraine. After yet another atrocity in Bosnia, when a Bosnian Serb mortar shell killed 68 and wounded around 200, landing on a crowded marketplace, a peace plan was advanced by UN Special Envoy Cyrus Vance and the EU representative Lord Owen, which would divide Bosnia into 10 semi-autonomous provinces, 3 each of Bosniak, Croat and Serb, with a neutral district around Sarajevo. The plan had official UN backing, and some of the major players made encouraging noises, but said they'd have to have referendums and consultations before agreeing anything. February the 12th was a big day in Norway, as 2 men broke into the National Gallery in Oslo and stole Edvard Munch's painting The Scream, leaving a note reading, "Thanks for the poor security." A radical anti-abortion group claimed responsibility, but soon the real thieves asked for $1 million ransom, which the gallery refused to pay. A complex sting operation was set up by the Norwegian police in collaboration with the British Police's Covert Operations Group and expertise from the Getty Museum, which recovered the painting undamaged later in May, and 4 men were convicted in 1996, but the convictions were later overturned as it emerged the British operatives had entered Norway under false identities, which invalidated their evidence. The reason that the Scream was vulnerable is that it had been moved as part of a celebration of Norwegian culture for the Winter Olympics in Lillehammer, which opened the same day as the theft. It was a landmark Games for a number of reasons, not least that it had only been 2 years since the last edition at Albertville in France, thanks to the IOC's deciding to stagger the Winter and Summer Games rather than have them both in the same year. With so many new countries having appeared on the map in the last few years, it was the largest Winter Olympics yet in terms of number of participating countries, with 67 nations competing. The former Soviet republics of Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Ukraine and Uzbekistan all entered in their own right for the first time, and Russia for the first time since 1912. The Czech Republic and Slovakia also took part as separate entities for the first time, and following Slovenia and Croatia's debut in 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina took part for the first time, their four-man bob team symbolically made up of one Serb, one Croat and two Bosniaks, reflecting the ethnic makeup of the country. The IOC urged all of the combatants in Bosnia to observe the ancient tradition of the Olympic truce and suspend all hostilities during the Games, which, needless to say, didn't happen. Indeed, during the Games, American F-16 jets shot down four rather elderly Bosnian Serb jets near Banja Luka, which had just bombed a factory in violation of the UN no-fly zone, in what was the first official combat mission in NATO's history. This was also the first Winter Olympics at which the so-called Eddie the Eagle rule had been in place, requiring that would-be Olympians had to have been placed in the top 30% or the top 50 in an international event, and so 11 participants from less traditional Winter Olympic countries were disappointed, but the rules didn't apply to bobsleigh and luge events, which therefore saw quite a variety of participants, including the US Virgin Islands, Trinidad and Tobago, American Samoa, Jamaica and Puerto Rico. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Norwegian team performed brilliantly with the highest medal tally of all nations, 26, including a clean sweep in the men's combined skiing event, but Russia pipped them to the top of the medals table with 11 golds to Norway's 10. Russian cross-country skier Lyubov Yegorova and Norwegian speed skater Johan Olav Koss won 3 golds each, the most of any athlete, while Italian cross-country skier Manuela Di Centa ended up with the most medals of any colour, winning 2 golds, 2 silvers and a bronze, 1 medal in each of the 5 cross-country events. The winter had been a busy one in the world of Formula One, with the new regulations finally having been nailed down and teams scrambling to either build new cars or make their old ones compliant. The ban on all electronic driver aids, except for semi-automatic gearboxes and one-way car-to-pit data telemetry, was intended by the governing body both to reduce costs in a period when smaller teams are struggling to keep afloat, and to reduce the perception that racing was becoming too technical and electronic, and that driver skill was becoming less important. The view that "my gran could win in that Williams" was becoming widespread in the popular media, even if the specialists appreciated there was a bit more to it than that. The last major rule change, the ban on turbo engines, had proved successful in lowering costs and encouraging new entries, but many within the sport pointed out that that had been brought in gradually over 2 years, with phased reductions in turbo power before the outright ban. The ban on driver aids would be essentially overnight, and significantly came with no simultaneous attempt to curb the speed of the cars themselves, which had increasingly become manageable only with the help of those systems. Ayrton Senna was among many drivers who predicted that the result would be, quote, a season with a lot of accidents, end quote, as the driver found the new limits of themselves and their machinery, and the teams worked out what worked and what didn't. Others were concerned about the reintroduction of refuelling, some for safety reasons, some for sporting reasons. If a team could send a car out of the pits with a wheel not on properly or an air gun hose still attached, for example, surely it would be just as easy to make a mistake in the heat of the moment, but now with volatile fuel. The manufacturers of the equipment that would be used, Ante Technique, were naturally reassuring. The pumps were designed in such a way they said that fuel could only flow when the nozzle was properly docked with the inlet on the car, but some remained to be convinced. And even if it all went smoothly, others pointed out, wouldn't the increased time of pit stops mean that races became more tactical, with pit strategy taking over from on-track racing to a greater extent than previously? And of course, there were questions about whether teams would abide by the rules. F1 designers, after all, are employed to work within the letter, not the spirit of the regulations, and are always looking for that loophole that will enable them to steal a march on the opposition. It was easy for scrutineers to measure physical dimensions or check for specific mechanical components, but how to verify whether computer software had or hadn't been used, since it wasn't like all computer engine management software had been banned, just the specific applications called traction control and launch control? Would post-race scrutineering now have to include analysing thousands of lines of computer code? The Kyalami Circuit's owners had encountered financial troubles, and the track was sold to the South African Automobile Association, which decided that running a Grand Prix was too expensive, so after just 2 years on the calendar the South African Grand Prix was off again, just as the country was preparing to enter its new era, and as a replacement the Argentine Grand Prix was announced for October, running on the newly refurbished Buenos Aires circuit. The Brazilian Grand Prix would therefore be the opening round of the calendar. Instead of the European Grand Prix at Donington, Bernie Ecclestone got his delayed second race in Japan, a year after the deal at Autopolis had gone base over Apex. The Pacific Grand Prix, as it was called, would be held at the Tanaka International Circuit in the hills of southern Honshu, originally opened as a private circuit for track days in 1990, and Monaco and Spain swapped slots again for reasons not elaborated on anywhere I've read. The two major subjects of speculation over the winter, alongside all the talk about how the rule changes would play out, were around Alain Prost and Ligier. The defending champion had spent most of the off-season batting away the entreaties of McLaren and Peugeot before finally agreeing to test the new MP49 at Estoril in early March. A few days later he confirmed that he would not be returning, saying that he'd been helping out some old friends and just confirming to himself that he was indeed done with driving F1. He was instead given a job as luxury consultant at Renault, who after all still had him under contract for 1994, and demonstrating the Renault Espace F1 concept car, which mounted one of Alain's 1993 V10s in a people carrier and is included in Gran Turismo 2 on the PS2 if anyone fancies a go at driving the monster. The other ongoing saga was over the ownership of Ligier. Owner Cyril de Rouvre had been sent to prison by a magistrate pending trial, and although he was out on appeal by the time of the first race, he still needed to sell the team in order to repay his huge debts. The contracts of Martin Brundle and Mark Blundell were snapped up, but de Rouvre wanted to sell the whole team as a going concern. Three major players emerged. Flavio Briatore's interest was already a matter of record, though many, especially in France, worried that all he was interested in was the Renault engines and that he'd close the team down, or worse, move it to England. Next was a consortium of former Ligier driver Philippe Streff, Oreca team owner Hugues de Schonac, and the Giraudy family, owners among other things of the Kilometer cosmetics firm, former Ozella sponsors. The third, though probably least likely option, was that Robin Herd would spend some of the $1 million he got from the sale of the March team to acquire Ligier for his current team Larousse. The French government was also a factor, by far the biggest sponsor of the team through state-owned Gitane, Lotto and Elf brands. Both French bidders had their own government supporters, Streff backed by Finance Minister Nicolas Sarkozy, and Larousse by Sports Minister Michel Alliot-Marie, no relation. All of that was still very much up in the air by the time the season began. With all that out of the way, it's time to take a closer look at the individual teams and drivers who are hoping to shine in 1994. Williams-Renault. Well, it certainly looks different. The camel yellow replaced by the red and gold trim of Rothmans, though the car is still predominantly blue and white. Under the new paint job, though, the FW16 is an evolution of the FW15C with the new regulations in mind. The rear end of the car is designed around an anhedral lower rear wing, which increased the surface area, which to function properly needed the rear end to be lower to the ground. To help with that, the drive shafts leading to the wheels were enclosed within shrouds profiled like wings, which could be quickly removed if they were deemed against the regulations. There was a new version of the Renault V10, the RS6, with a lower airbox and taller side pods, and the cockpit had been slightly reprofiled too. How that will all run remains to be seen, but even if the new regulations do succeed in tightening the field, most people are expecting the combination of Senna and Williams-Renault to continue being the yardstick for everyone else. Car 0, Damon Hill. Hill proved a lot of his doubters wrong in 1993, as despite his relatively old age for a new driver and his lack of junior success, he traded on his familiarity with the car, which he developed, to 3 wins and a couple of should-have-beens. Few people really believed there were no team orders between the rookie and the 3-times champion, but he definitely gave Prost a race on occasion, even if he never really took a win away from the Frenchman. 1994 should be more of the same as he welcomes his second triple champion teammate. But with David Coulthard having done the bulk of the testing on the FW16, Damon won't have that advantage, so this will be an interesting year to compare the two. Car number 2, Ayrton Senna. The brilliant Brazilian has been angling after a Williams drive for years now and has finally got his wish. Of course, everyone expects him to simply waltz off into the sunset, but things might not be that simple. He's been at McLaren so long he was practically part of the furniture at Woking, while Williams and Head are quite famous for refusing to put any one driver at the centre of their universe. Just ask Nelson Piquet. There may be opportunities for the others if Senna has a shaky start like Prost did in 1993, but most expect his quality to win the day in the end. He signed up for a 2-year contract, but so was Prost, and many expect that if Ayrton does win the title, he will also retire, honour satisfied, especially if he can get 10 more wins to beat Prost's record. Tyrrell Yamaha. Well, the only way is up after a difficult 1993 that saw the team fail to trouble the scorers for the first time since 1970, and accusing fingers point once again to the Yamaha engine, the firm having been synonymous with disappointing results in F1 since first appearing in 1989. And the engine in the back of the new car is the same, a revised OX-10, still essentially a rebadged Judd, with Ukyo Katayama still in car number 3 despite not exactly distinguishing himself. All is not doom and gloom for 1994 though. Harvey Postlethwaite returns as technical director and along with Mike Gascoigne and Jean-Claude Migeot has produced the new 022 chassis using the new Fondmetal aerodynamic R&D facility in Italy, co-financed by Tyrrell, who have a 2-year exclusive deal on its use. In car number 4, Andrea de Cesaris is replaced by Mark Blundell, coming off a very impressive year with Ligier. Tyrrells in the past have often been all white when desperately in need of sponsorship, and while they could do with a big-name title sponsor, they have kept all their deals from last year, with Japan Tobacco replacing their red cabin branding with Mild 7, alongside other Japanese sponsors Colby, known for their delicious prawn crackers, and Club Angle, a fashion house who also make the team's uniforms. Car number 3, Ukyo Katayama. One of the most likeable drivers in the paddock, the diminutive Japanese was rarely seen without a grin on his face, but on track he has yet to convince. He outpaced Andrea de Cesaris for much of 1993, but became just as infamous for spinning off as his teammate in his younger days. Some suggest that his slight frame just can't handle the forces in an F1 car, something that's hardly going to go away in the post-driver aids era, and others that he's just another talentless pay driver. On current evidence, he definitely seems to have his drive thanks to Japan Tobacco rather than his own talents, but there's presumably something in there that caused them to back him. Car number 4, Mark Blundell. Paired with Martin Brundle in both his 1991 and 93 seasons, Mark showed himself to be the equal with his confusingly named teammate on both occasions, even if the final results don't necessarily show that. Nonetheless, he tasted podium champagne twice for Ligier last year, the first time since 1986 the team laundry had to wash Moet and Chandon's finest out of the overalls, and is widely regarded as a highly promising driver for the future. In an ideal world, he'd have had a second season at a resurgent Ligier to cement his reputation, but since it all fell apart over there a bit late, Tyrrell was about the best he can do. It's certainly a good deal for Uncle Ken. The question is whether this will help Mark's career overall. Benetton Ford. Well, it certainly looks different. Like Williams, the familiar camel yellow is gone, replaced in this case with the two-tone blue of Mild 7, and some white accents too, giving the whole car a minty fresh look. The Benetton B194 is again, like the Williams, a heavily revised version of last year's car, which is itself an evolution of the B192, and retains the line's distinctive shark nose. But Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne and Pat Simmons know what they're about, as does aero boss Willem Toot, who's been with the team since they were called Tolman back in 1985. In the back, Jeff Goddard of Cosworth has produced the ED, the next generation of the HB V8, though Ford has decided for marketing reasons to name it the Z-Tech R, Z-Tech being a line of Ford engines rolled out for use in road cars in 1992. There are those who suggest that Benetton are playing it a bit too safe, and need to take some risks with the car to really step up to be championship-winning material, but whatever the car ends up as, it's a safe bet that Michael Schumacher will get the most out of it. The job of his teammate was a much sought-after one, and after a test day involving a number of hopefuls, JJ Leto was offered the job, but young Dutchman Jos Verstappen had impressed sufficiently at that test and with footwork that he was named as official test driver. Car number 5, Michael Schumacher. If he could get a consistently race-winning car underneath him, there's no doubt that Schumacher would have won more than just 2 races so far, but whatever his record says, it's clear to anyone watching that he is very special indeed, and is being spoken about as a future champion. He may not be quite the finished article yet, he still lets his frustration get the better of him sometimes, and it may take a move away from perennial underachievers Benetton, but no one doubts it will come. Car number 6, JJ Leto. As it turns out, Leto accidentally sabotaging his move to footwork is looking like a blessing in disguise. Being Michael Schumacher's teammate has been a rather thankless task for his predecessors, but he has been known as more talented than his car for some time, and will be keen to make the most of the opportunity that's arisen. He is hoping that he can do what Brundle and Patrese before him couldn't and win in the number 2 Benetton, which would incidentally make him the first Finn to win a Grand Prix since his mentor and manager Keke Rosberg back in 1985. McLaren Peugeot. If Williams and Benetton have new paint jobs with a lot of continuity, the familiar Marlboro chevrons are painted over a time of huge change at McLaren. Life after Senna starts here, and while both drivers are known to be talented, it's the first time since 1981, John Watson and Andrea De Cesaris, that the team hasn't had a world champion driving for them, and the first time in its entire history that neither of its drivers have even won a race. Furthermore, for all the French media hype about the big Renault-Peugeot showdown, the A4 engine, adapted from the one in the Marque's successful Le Mans winning Group C car, was said to only be producing 700 brake horsepower, compared to the reported 830 plus in the Renault RS6. Neil Oatley's team have sensibly not strayed too far from the surprisingly good MP4-8, but as with everyone else, it remains to be seen how much of an effect the lack of electronic support will have. After Prost finally decided not to drive just weeks before the Brazilian Grand Prix, there was a bit of a scramble to find a second driver. Peugeot were pushing very hard for Philippe Alliot, who they'd bought out of his LaRousse contract, but Ron Dennis simply didn't rate him and signed Martin Brundle, to the displeasure of the French contingent, but he did agree to sign up Alliot as test driver. Car 7, Mika Hakkinen. Must have been immensely frustrating for Mika watching his American namesake flounder in 1993 as he tested the car and raced in other competitions, but his time wasn't wasted as he got to know car and team and honed his racecraft, and when he finally did get his chance at Estoril, he seized it with both hands. He may have only finished one of his 3 races, and his accident in Portugal was a driver error, but he definitely impressed with his driving. Now he's the team number 1, but paired with an enormously experienced teammate, and both have a huge hunger to get on that top step. If the car is any good, this could be great viewing. Car number 8, Martin Brundle. With 2 weeks to go before the Brazilian Grand Prix, Martin Brundle must have been resigning himself to another year in the doldrums, back to sports cars maybe, or work on his golf swing, maybe a bit of light broadcasting. But then he got the call from Ron Dennis, and before he knew it, he was a McLaren driver. Many thought his chance at the big time had gone when he was dropped by Benetton, and then his impressive year with Ligier had come to nothing given the goings-on at Magny-Cours, so the announcement delighted his many British fans, even though so much about McLaren in 1994 is still an unknown quantity. At 34, he may not have too many chances left, so he needs to make the most of this one, and the celebration has a slightly updated helmet design, replacing the flaring straight lines with a wavy design. Footwork Ford. It's all gone rather wrong for Footwork after a promising couple of seasons, with Moog and Honda taking their engines off to Lotus, Derek Warwick retiring, and Aguri Suzuki only driving by the grace of Mugen anyway. And then in the off-season, the Footwork firm withdrew all their sponsorship, although Wataru Ohashi, as a private individual, retained a controlling stake in the team, so it will continue under the name Footwork. With money now very short, Alan Jenkins and Dave Arney produced the FA14 chassis, which mounted the Ford HB units used by McLaren last year, and actually looked quite good. The team launched the car in an eye-catching new blue and white livery at Silverstone, announcing Christian Fittipaldi and Gianni Morbidelli, the 1992 Minardi pairing, as their drivers, and asking if anyone, please, fancied sponsoring the car. Car number 9, Christian Fittipaldi. The young Brazilian had had a pretty reasonable 1993 at Minardi, driving solidly and reliably for the most part, only failing to finish twice, and finished the season on 5 points. But the combination of financial pressures and a falling out behind the scenes with Giancarlo Minardi saw him unceremoniously elbowed out in favour of Jean-Marc Gounod. He nearly made his Footwork debut in Australia when Derek Warwick was ill, but when the indefatigable Englishman decided to race after all, he'd have to wait until his home race. He'll be certain of local support there, if nothing else. Car 10, Gianni Morbidelli. 2 seasons in F1 with Minardi and a single race drive for Ferrari, and 6th place in the monsoon at Adelaide in 1991 is not to be sniffed at, had seen Gianni establish himself as a strong, consistent driver, but it was a lack of sponsorship, as always, that saw him out of a seat in 1993, while Nicola Larini replaced him as Ferrari's test driver. So, instead, he spent 1993 in Italian touring cars, joining fellow F1 alumni Gabriele Tarquini, Giorgio Francia and Alessandro Nannini at the Alfa Romeo Works team. Driving 8 of the 10 rounds, he scored a fantastic double-header win at Magione and a third at Verano, but could only manage 9th overall. It was late in the season when he was approached by Jackie Oliver with a bit of a driver crisis on his hands, and jumped at the chance to get back into F1, even if the quality of his mount was still rather suspect. Lotus, Mugen, Honda. A promising start to 1993 had turned into another disappointing season for Team Lotus, and chief sponsor Castrol were on their way over the off-season, with Japanese pharmaceutical firm Shionogi upping their contribution a little to replace Castrol on the airbox, but not enough to get title sponsor status. Gone from the car too was Castrol's red colouring, so it was back to yellow, white and green on the 107C, another version of the car that debuted in 1992 to such great effect, but fell further and further behind as 1993 went on. Now stripped of its troublesome active suspension, and with the team's development free to focus elsewhere, there is some hope that with the more powerful Mugen Honda in the back it might do well, but a lot will ride on the new 109 chassis being readied later in the year. Car number 11, Pedro Lamy. The highly rated young Portuguese driver didn't get much of a chance to show his quality in 1993, having not actually seen the checkered flag in his 4 outings, though he got far enough to be classified twice. But Peters, Collins and Wright clearly think he's worth keeping the still under contract Alessandro Zanardi out of the race seat for, so he's obviously doing something right. He'll have to do well enough to make his case, or he might well find Zanardi reclaiming that seat if he underperforms. Car number 12, Johnny Herbert. Entering his 4th season with the Lotus team, with whom he's become somewhat synonymous, Johnny remains a popular figure, with most neutrals hoping his luck will pick up eventually. But he's been in F1 for half a decade at this point and still hasn't managed to get onto a podium, and he's no longer the up-and-coming young charger, but is now having to look over his shoulder at the likes of Pedro Lamy. Jordan Hart. Eddie Jordan will be hoping just to keep the number of drivers to single figures this season, and begins the season with the lineup he ended 1993 with Rubens Barrichello and Eddie Irvine. The new Jordan 194 by Gary Anderson's team looks good, a sweep of Irish green added to the livery thanks to increased sponsorship from the Irish government via its tourist board, and the team are continuing with the V10 Hart, which had been promising if not hugely competitive or reliable in 1993. After making a splash in their first year, Jordan have endured 2 years in the doldrums, and the team will be hoping this simple, unfussy design will help them recapture some of their original form. British F3 champion Kelvin Burt has signed up as test driver, but budget for testing is limited. He may get his chance, though, if 1994 goes anything like 1993 did. Car 14, Rubens Barrichello. Having entered F1 at a very young age with limited junior experience behind him, Barrichello impressed immediately, and it was only a string of mechanical failures and the car's dislike of certain tracks that saw him only finish in the points once. He pretty much blew the socks off all his teammates, though most had mitigating circumstances, and a lot of people, particularly back home in Brazil, are watching with anticipation, hoping he can be the new Senna when the current version decides to hang up his helmet. Car 15, Eddie Irvine. Eddie Jordan has a reputation for working well with drivers and did what many thought was impossible in 1991 and turned Andrea de Cesaris into a half-decent racer. Eddie Irvine certainly made an impact in his debut in Japan, but his eventful race showed that he might be quick, but he still has a wild streak that will need to be calmed down if he's to succeed. But if EJ can work his magic again, EI might turn out to be a good find for the team. He certainly fits right into their fun, irreverent atmosphere. LaRousse Ford. Robin Hurd's 15-strong LaRousse UK outfit designed the LH94, based around last year's monocoque, but stiffer and lighter, and with the heavy Lamborghini V12s replaced by ex-Benetton Ford HB Series 7s, and the team have also bought Benetton's 1993 gearboxes to run the engines through. One positive development for LaRousse is some decent financial support from former French F1 driver Patrick Tambay and Belgian brewery Alken Maes, which had had the car decked out in the yellow and green colours of its low-alcohol Tourtel brand, initially in a horizontal slice livery with a band of red at the top for winter testing, but by the time they arrived in Brazil, this had been replaced with a predominantly green livery. Eric Comas continued on driving duties, but Philippe Alliot, having gone over to McLaren with his Peugeot contract, was replaced by Monegasque driver Olivier Beretta. The team even have a bit of budget for testing and development, so things may finally be looking up for them. Car number 19, Olivier Beretta. The native son of Monaco was brought up watching Prost, Senna and Piquet race around the streets of his hometown as he drove karts before moving into French F3, racing in 1989 and 90, and coming third overall in the latter year. In 1991 he split his time between British and French F1 series, but overstretched himself and broke his wrist into the bargain. That might have been it, but in 1992 he was identified by Nelson Piquet for his putative F3000 project. That turned out to be a dead end, but he moved to the 40 Corsi team and turned heads by winning the opening round in 1993 at Donington. He had also done some testing for Lotus, shaking down the new 107 chassis during 1992, and tested for Larousse in 93, so with Philippe Alliot moving on, his sponsors were able to arrange a seat in F1, despite his F3000 season tailing off, seeing him finish 6th overall. Car number 20, Eric Comas. A solid if unspectacular season at Larousse in 1993 saw Comas only trouble the scorers once, with 6th place in Portugal, but when the car worked he was usually found racing in the midfield, and if he made the end it was often in the top 10. He gave as good as he got against the more experienced and better supported Alliot in qualifying too, and going into 1994 he will be expecting to be the number 1 driver against his rookie teammate. Minardi Scuderia Italia Ford. And so begins a new chapter in the little Italian team's history, becoming a slightly bigger Italian team by merging with the Scuderia Italia squad. Great care seems to have been taken to present the team as an equal partnership, from the new name, though the constructor is officially Minardi, which will undoubtedly be what everyone calls them, to the new livery, studiously avoiding the black-yellow-white of Minardi and the red-white of Scuderia Italia. 1 driver from each component team was selected, in both cases the older, more experienced of the two, with Luca Badoa taking over testing duties. A shame after his pretty decent season, but his day will come. The team begin the season with the M193B, revised for the new technical regulations, with Minardi's Aldo Costa and Scuderia Italia's Gustav Brunner cooperating on a new car for later in the season. The optics look good, but how will the teams meld, and will the partnership bear fruit? Car number 23, Pierluigi Martini. Pint-sized Pierluigi started 1993 without a drive, but was able to benefit from Fabrizio Barbazza's financial woes to return to his old team for a 3rd stint, and was immediately back on the pace, matching the highly rated Christian Fittipaldi for qualifying form, even if he never quite managed to make the scoreboard. It seems appropriate that he leads the team into this new partnership. Car number 24, Michele Alboreto. His Ferrari days seem a long time ago now, and the unfortunate Michele seems to have had nothing but bad luck ever since, between losing his Tyrrell drive over sponsorship and then going from the frying pan of footwork into the fire of Lola BMS. At 38, he must be looking at wrapping up his career soon, but will be hoping that the new Minardi outfit gives him the opportunity at least to do so on a high note. The competition between the two Italian veterans will certainly be interesting to watch. Ligier Renault. For now, Cyril de Rouvre is still in charge, but an air of deep uncertainty hangs over the team, which is particularly galling after their excellent 1993. The British contingent is already headed for the doors, not only the Brundell twins in the cockpit, but the JS39's chief designer Paul Crooks has signed up to the new Simtech team. With nobody willing to invest money in a car right now, Gerard Ducarouge's team have come up with a modified version of the JS39 for the new regulations, and for the time being at least, the team still have engine parity with Williams, which means top-of-the-line Renault RS6s in the back still run through the Williams transmission. Visually, the car's pretty much identical, with a couple of minor livery tweaks and the absence of the yellow Les Pages Jaunes sponsor stickers on the nose. Eric Bernard spent 1993 testing the Ligier and had hoped to be given a drive near the end of the season, but gets his reward with a full race seat, joined by F3000 champion Olivier Panis, as the team returned to French drivers after a year's Anglo madness. His Dams teammate Frank Lagos, who won the last 2 races of the season meanwhile, has been given Bernard's former testing role. Car number 25, Eric Bernard. It's been a long road back to F1 for Eric Bernard after breaking his leg badly at the end of 1991. 92 saw him slowly regaining fitness and returning to racing, and his backing from Elf Petrol helped him get the Ligier testing job in 1993. With miles of development on the JS39 car and a team in need of a cheap driver, he seemed the obvious and popular choice. Car number 26, Olivier Panis. Born in Lyon in 1966, Panis first came to notice winning the 1989 Formula Renault Elf title in his 2nd year, in the category having come up from karting. He was driving for the Elf Works team and moved with them up to French F3 for 1990, finishing 4th overall, then 2nd in 1991, which earned him a drive in F3000. Unfortunately, the Appomattox team with whom he made his debut had a pretty dreadful 1992, and although he salvaged 2 podiums, he finished up a disappointing 10th. Moving to ex-Ligier driver René Arnoux' Elf-supported Dams team for 1993, though, proved his breakthrough, and after a slow start, he won 3 races on the trot to come out on top in a nail-biting finale, ending up champion over Pedro Lamy by just 1 point. He was talked about for the Benetton drive, but when that fell through, Ligier jumped at the opportunity. Ferrari. This is it. This is the most beautiful Ferrari of the entire Wings and Sponsors era, and I will not be taking any further questions on the matter. The raised nose, the gold wheel trim, the sculpted side pod intakes, everything about it looks fast. Of course, all that will be completely irrelevant if it goes as poorly as its predecessors. Perhaps as a sign that the team are drawing a line under the past and looking to the future, they've changed their numbering scheme again, so this is not the F94, but the 412T1. I don't know either. Jean Todt certainly has to hope this new car is able to turn the team's fortunes around fairly quickly, although he has been at pains to stress the team is a long-term project. Regularly challenging for podiums, though, would be an improvement on 1993, but what the fans, media and above all their Fiat paymasters demand are wins and a title shot. If the car's good, both drivers have the capacity to deliver that, but will Todt get the time he thinks he needs? Car 27, Jean Alesi. His passport and super license may be French, but Giovanni Alesi is Italian at heart, and if he regrets not signing for Williams back in 1991, he's never shown it. He would almost certainly have won races and could be a world champion by now, but instead chooses to drag a series of sluggish Ferraris around by willpower alone, and the fans love him for it. Alesi has thoroughly inherited the mantle of Gilles Villeneuve, along with his car number, and it would take even the most flinty-hearted fan of an opposition team not to want to see Jean finally ascend that winner's step. Car 28, Gerhard Berger. The lanky Austrian has needed all of his famous good humour to deal with the switch from the efficient, organised McLaren to the hot mess that is Ferrari's internal politics. Fortunately for him, he knows the score and concentrates on getting his head down and enjoying the racing. By now one of the sport's elder statesmen, he's lost none of his speed or hunger to win, and will hope to be the one to bring success back to the Scuderia after the lean years. There were times early in 1993 when the motoring press were getting on his case for being slow. One cartoon in a French magazine showed him with a pillow behind his head in the cockpit, but he was having the bulk of the problems with the active suspension, and then later on with his elbow injury, and still managed to get on the podium. Sauber Mercedes. The Sauber squad are widely held to be playing the part of John the Baptist, crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way for Mercedes-Benz. The team's debut year went well enough, with reliability the main factor behind not scoring more often, but now in 1994 the Mercedes connection is a little more concrete than a concept buy sticker, with the Ilmor V10 that was badged as a Sauber last year now badged as a Mercedes-Benz, while the driver lineup reunites two of the Stuttgart firm's three musketeers from the successful Sauber Mercedes sports car team of the early 90s. The new chassis, Leo Ress's C13, is still a little light on sponsors. Financial Magazine Broker are the title sponsors, but they will be hoping to attract more, but it looks neat enough, and if the team do as well as they should, it will help immensely in balancing the books. Car number 29, Karl Wendlinger. Often described as the most talented of the Wendlinger-Schumacher-Frentzen trio, Karl hasn't had the breaks that Michael had, but will be hoping that his Sauber team are on an upward trajectory with the help of his old Mercedes employers. Wendlinger outscored Leto in 1993, though he rarely blew him away, and he seemed to improve as the season went on. The quiet, introspective young man is still awaiting his first podium, but if the car goes well enough, he may manage that this year. Car number 30, Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Mönchengladbach is best known for the exploits of its football team in the 1970s and 80s, but young Heinz-Harald was only interested in racing. He was clearly talented early on, winning the German junior kart title at 14 in 1981. With his father running the team and acting as his manager, next was Formula Ford 2000 in 1986, followed by joining Jochen Masse's Formula Opel Lotus team in 1988. Rookie champion, he moved straight on up to F3, where the German National Motorsports Committee supported him and Schumacher in response to Bernie Ecclestone's push to encourage more Germans into F1. Frentzen and Schumacher had several bad-tempered clashes on their way to joint second place to that man Wendlinger in the final standings. 1990 saw HHF join Eddie Jordan Racing in Formula 3000 and partnering Eddie Irvine. Results weren't great, as Jordan were in the middle of preparing their F1 team and had rather taken their eye off the F3000 ball, and a move to Dutch team Vortex in 1992 didn't improve matters much. Heading for Japan for the last 3 races of that season saw him score a podium in the last round at Suzuka, and then he drove the full year for Team Nova in 1993, gaining experience but not much in the way of success, second place at Fuji being his only points finish. Now back to Europe full-time, he'll be keen to prove himself against both Wendlinger and his old sparring partner Schumacher, who even stole his girlfriend Corinna back in the day, allegedly. Simtek Ford. The Simtek team have had a bit of an unusual journey to F1. They were founded in 1989 as an engineering consultancy firm by Nick Worth, Max Mosley and Donald Hughes. Nick had been something of an engineering wunderkind and had made friends at university with Robin Hurd's son Mark, and just 2 days after graduating he started working on the aerodynamics team at March, where he assisted Adrian Newey designing the 881 chassis, penned the March Nissan Le Mans car by himself, and was offered the chief designer job at Ligier for 1989, but opted to stay with March, only for the team to be sold to Leighton House. Max Mosley and Robin Hurd pulled out of the team and wanted to set up on their own, but rather than take the financial risk of a new racing team, they decided to go the consultancy route, and brought in Nick Worth to run the show, initially out of his own house with a single employee, but quickly expanding to building their own wind tunnel in Banbury in Oxfordshire, not far from the famous Motorsport Valley northwest of London. Thanks to Mosley's connections, work rolled in. They built Ligier's wind tunnel at Magny-Cours, designed car parts for Group C, F3000 and IndyCar teams, and perhaps most famously, partnered with BMW to design an F1 car as the Bavarian firm were toying with entering as a constructor, as well as the 3 Series touring cars for the DTM season in 1991. The F1 car designed for BMW ended up being sold to Andrea Sassetti and seeing the track as the Andrea Moda S192, before being sold on to the abortive Spanish Bravo team. During 1992, Max Mosley won election as head of the FIA and divested himself of his interests in Simtek, while Nick Worth, perhaps stung by how badly the S192 had fared, was now thinking of entering F1 off his own bat, and in mid-93 announced just that, with Sir Jack Brabham buying some of Mosley's stake and backing the project, which also announced his son David as one of their drivers. There was an initial setback when their original design for the 1994 Challenger had to be scrapped, as it was built around active suspension, and with no previous on-track pedigree the team found it difficult to attract sponsors. An approach to Andrea de Cesaris with his Marlboro money fell through for unknown reasons. Brazilian F3000 hot shoe Gilles de Ferran decided to stick with Paul Stewart and make a title bid for 1994, and well-backed Frenchman Jean-Marc Gounon was seemingly in the front seat, but Austrian Roland Ratzenberger managed to scrape together a better bid, so he got the seat on a 5-race deal. A late sponsorship deal with MTV, not your traditional F1 sponsor, and likewise Universal Studios, who added that stripe of red to the top of the car, helped make the team's ends meet, and they'll be hoping to attract some more along the way. Car 31, David Brabham. Sir Jack's younger son had last been seen in F1 driving for the family team, and while he hadn't entirely embarrassed himself, he had been largely beaten over the course of the season by his teammate Stefano Modena. Unable to raise enough sponsorship either, he was shown the door at the end of the season, and moving into sports cars joined Tom Walkinshaw's Silk-Cut Jaguar team for the second half of the season, as well as winning the Spa 24-hour in a Nissan Skyline, co-driving with Anders Olofsson and Naoki Hattori. Without a drive for 1993, though, he was an early recruit for Simtek's project and helped develop the car. Car 32, Roland Ratzenberger. 34-year-old Ratzenberger was born in Salzburg, and on graduating from technical school, enrolled in the Walter Lechner Racing School in 1978, and then progressed to Formula Ford, moving to the UK to advance his career, and a coincidental similarity to the name of popular children's TV character Roland Rat gained him some notice, culminating in a 1985 skit on the show in which the Rolands had a race at Silverstone.
There must be a problem with his car. No, wait a minute, he's taking an emergency phone call, I'm told. Who it's from, we don't quite know, but it must be important.
Roland, quickly, there's a telephone call for you.
Hello, who is this?
All right, hamburger. Hey, it's Roland here. Here, I'm just calling from the Rattlebell, honey. I just wanted to wish you good luck for the race. I didn't get a chance at the beginning.
You mean to say you've pulled me off the track just to wish me good luck?
Yeah, it does rather look that way, doesn't it? Yeah.
You're trying to slow me up. You cheat, Mr. Rat.
How dare you? I would never consider such a thing.
He was successful too, winning the Formula Ford Race of Champions and Festival in 1986, and split the following year between continuing with F3 and entering the British Touring Car Championship, then British F3000 and BTCC in 1988. Coming third in the British F3000 series in 1989, he'd already dipped his toe in Japanese waters, and in 1990 he moved across, entering Japanese touring cars, sports prototypes and F3000, without a great deal of success in any of them, winning a few races but never able to get a decent string of results together. Nonetheless, he made friends at his pad in Monaco with Barbara Bailau, a wealthy businessman with Dutch roots, who had a stable of artists and other budding sports stars whom she sponsored, and she decided to invest $500,000 to get Roland the second Simtek seat on a 5-race deal. He's old to be making his debut and doesn't have a lot of junior success to look back on, but of course the same was true of Damon Hill last year. But Simtek are no Williams, at least not yet, and this may not be the best place to show his skills. Either way, he seems delighted simply to be there. Pacific Ilmore. A more traditional path than Simtek led Keith Wiggins and his Pacific squad into Formula One. The former driver and mechanic Wiggins founded the team in 1984 at Snetterton in Norfolk, arranged sponsorship from Marlboro, and immediately won both the European and Benelux Formula Ford 1600 titles with Norwegian driver Harold Huysmans. When Harold moved to F3 at the end of the year, he recommended driver Bertrand Gachot, whom he'd met on the Benelux circuit, and at the wheel of a Pacific Reynard, but won the 1985 British FF 1600 series, then the FF 2000 series the next year, before moving on, and in came JJ Leto instead and immediately won both British and European FF 2000 titles in 1987. Obviously Pacific had this Formula Ford business sorted and moved up to F3 for 1988 with Leto on board, and won it at the first attempt before moving straight up to F3000 with Leto and new recruit Eddie Irvine. Here they finally found a series they couldn't monster at the first attempt, and things weren't helped when Marlboro withdrew their backing in 1990, forcing Wiggins and co to bring in pay drivers. But a better 1991, with Christian Fittipaldi winning the title in a Pacific, saw those red chevrons back, with promising drivers Laurent Aiello and Jordi Genet in the cockpit. Genet did well while Aiello struggled, but the team were really caught out by mid-season technical developments, and Jordi could only manage 5th overall. By now, though, Wiggins was considering an F1 entry, and would have done so in 1993, having done a deal for Ford HB engines, only to hit financial trouble and have to abandon the idea and return to F3000 with David Coulthard and Michael Bartels. The former did well, staying in the title hunt until the last race, but Wiggins was still set on F1. So for 1994, and now freed from the need to spend lots on electronic driver aids, the PR01 began to take shape. A deal for 1992 spec Ilmore V10s, the ones out of the March cars, ate up 40% of the budget, while Reynard helped out by actually building Paul Brown's chassis as well as supplying their 6-speed gearbox. A reunion with Bertrand Gachot, out of F1 since the end of 1992, gave the team a solid first driver, while Oliver Gavin was also brought in to shake down the new car. Like Simtek, the second seat was up for sale, and in this case it was Paul Belmondo who came up with the cash. The car looks good with its Benetton-style shark nose, but pre-season testing has been ominous, with a number of installation issues with the old engines, and Autosport reporting that the chassis had the, quote, structural rigidity of a paper bag, end quote. And again, money has been a problem. With no title sponsor on board, testing time has been very limited, and the team arrive in Brazil with still no real idea of how the car will actually perform. Car number 33, Paul Belmondo. The 1992 March Ilmore was probably not the best place for Paul Belmondo to showcase whatever talents he may have, and while he was pretty much blown away by Karl Wendlinger, the Austrian is pretty good, and Paul was only there to pay the bills anyway. Benetton threw him a lifeline, employing him among a stable of test drivers during 1993, but for most of the year he was driving in the French Super Turismo series. With a signal lack of success, his best result was 7th, and failed to finish Le Mans in a TWR Jaguar. Someone, though, is apparently still willing to put money behind him, and was able to buy him into the Pacific team. In all honesty, he's probably in for more of the same as in 92, a mobile checkbook bankrolling the main effort, behind Gachot, but you never know. Car number 34, Bertrand Gachot. Gachot's never quite lived up to his promise, thanks not least to consistently finding himself in uncompetitive cars, Eurobrunn, Onyx, Coloni. He showed what he could do in the 1991 Jordan before his moment of madness in that London taxi, and paid the penance with a 1992 season in the dreadful Venturi LaRousse. Rather than take yet another backmarker drive in 1993, he opted to join the new Pacific Grand Prix outfit and help them prepare for their assault on Formula One. So, there we are. Now, the 1994 season is one of the most famous and infamous seasons of F1 for a number of reasons, and a lot of what happened is still subject to hot debate and analysis. Obviously, I'm going to say keep the comments civil, but also this. Better writers than me have gone very deep on the whole thing, a particular mention here for Ibrahim Malik, who produced the well-reviewed and researched 1994 The Untold Story of a Tragic and Controversial F1 Season. As far as Turbos and Tantrums is concerned, I'm going to continue to present events as they occurred, try and keep things brief and concise, and more to the point, try not to forget all of the other things going on at the same time as the big stories. So if there's a detail I don't mention, it's probably less because I've forgotten or missed it, but more that I'm just trying to keep the video length manageable, or that it's something that didn't emerge until much later. I'm also going to try hard to be as neutral and dispassionate as I can on the big controversies of the year. For what it's worth, and you may already have figured this out, my favourite driver at the time was Hakkinen, and my favourite team was Lotus, in case anyone thinks I'm favouring one side or another, though of course being British, I'm sure I absorbed a certain amount of bias from the media at the time. Alright, see you all in Brazil.